Hey everyone, and welcome to the SHIRO Editor's Corner, a completely new and unscripted series of mini-casts with your hosts Dave and Peter. Come join your elder SHIROs as we reminisce on our favorite Saturn memories in this new and nostalgia-packed podcast series. Hey everyone, it's SaturnDave here and Peter, and this is a episode of Editor's Corner. It's been a while. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. A lot has happened since we've recorded an Editor's Corner. I'm just curious what you've been up to since our last cast.
Oh, geez. You know, the big sort of new love in my life is I recently bought a bicycle. And,
Ooh.
you know, that might sound really weird or whatever, but with how busy life has been, especially the last 5-6 years where I've been working and going to school, there's been hardly any time for anything. And so something like, you know, taking the time to ride a bicycle was just out of the question for years and years.
Yeah.
Back into, you know, riding around on a bike, and oh my goodness, I absolutely love it. The weather's finally nice, you know, where I am. And yeah, it's great to get out there and soak in the sunshine and just ride around, you know. So I've really, really missed that. And so it got me thinking that I'm really kind of reconnecting with a lot of pleasures from my youth, you know, biking being one of them.
What kind of bicycle is this? Is this like a road bike, like a racing bike, or is this like an off-road? You know,
No. Like it's a mountain bike.
Oh, okay, cool.
Although I will admit that it is an e-bike. I wanted to get an e-bike. Well, there's a bunch of reasons why I wanted to get an e-bike, but it's a nice all-wheel drive e-bike. So there's motors on both the front and the rear tire, and so, you know, I find that I don't often make use of the function, but there's definitely times that it comes in handy. And as I'm getting older, you know, to be able to quickly turn on a little bit of a boost is, you know, it's a huge. What it does is it heightens the enjoyment of the experience of biking for an extended period of time, right? So it's just fun. It's fun. And then, yeah, like on the gaming front, I've been playing some Virtua Fighter 3 on the Dreamcast. And I love the Virtua Fighter series, but I will say that the more time I spend with the Dreamcast port, the more I realize that as good a game as Virtua Fighter 3 is, the Dreamcast port is not the best. It's definitely lacking.
We're on the same page with that. And I don't know what it is. Like, you want to like it, right? I mean, I love Virtua Fighter, the series. I loved Virtua Fighter 3 in the arcade. But is it Tag Battle or Team Battle?
Team Battle, I think. Remember.
TB. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It left me wanting something. This in the very much the same way that Daytona USA on the Dreamcast was just not, you know, I thought that it was going to be, you know, finally a true arcade port, you know, of Daytona. And no, I actually enjoy the one on the Saturn, as janky as it is, more than the one on the Dreamcast.
Likewise.
Wouldn't be until like the PlayStation 3 era that we would get, you know, a 1-to-1, you know, arcade. That's crazy. But yeah, Virtua Fighter 3 on the Dreamcast is just not my cup of tea.
No, and it's like you said, you know, you really want to like it, and the gameplay's there. The controller makes it awkward, but then
like it's not all bad.
No, it isn't all bad, but it's bad enough in some areas that really kind of it's jarring, I guess you could say, in some ways.
I definitely don't recommend that folks play it with the Dreamcast pad. You got to get the arcade stick, you know. Definitely get the arcade stick with the VMU slot in the top and everything. And I would recommend getting the arcade stick anyway because of like games like Third Strike and, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom. There's so many great fighting games on the Dreamcast, and you really can't play them with that, you know, with that pad. You know, alternatively, if you're on Saturn, I highly recommend the pad if that's all you have. You know, it's still a great, you know, 6-button pad.
100%. Yeah.
So you've been getting into that. Anything else on the gaming front?
Of all things, I've been playing a lot of Corpse Killer. You know, it's a guilty pleasure of mine. I tend to go to it more and more these days. It's just mindless, sort of corny shooting fun, and just been really getting,
Corpse Killer. Okay, so that's the Henry Explorers, right?
No, that's Crypt Killer.
That's Crypt Killer. Corpse Killer
is the full motion
is the
video
full
with,
motion videos.
Dr. Hellman
The
and
yeah, Tom Zito.
yeah, that's it. Yes.
Really? And that's you're playing it with the pad, right?
Yes, because of course on the Saturn that's the only way to play it. Although I did recently pick up the Sega CD32X version of Corpse Killer.
Mm.
Totally loving it.
CD32, the 32X CD version. Nice. Okay.
Yes,
So that's
yes,
obviously
yes.
uh just a tad lesser than as far as performance and stuff than the Saturn version.
Yeah, not much. I mean, the video quality seems to be quite on par with the Saturn, but it is heavily bordered on the Sega CD32X, whereas it's full screen on the Saturn, right? So
Right.
and I'll just admit this right now. I also own a physical copy of the 2020 Nintendo Switch remaster of that game. So I don't
Yeah.
understand. This is a game I utterly detested when I was young, and here I am just kind of really getting into it. So I can't really explain it other than maybe, it's fun for quick short bursts, and that's what that tends to be what my gaming is like these days versus back when I was younger when I wanted these like super long immersive experiences. So,
Well, no, I mean there's something to be said for that though. I mean if you're enjoying it now for what it is, and
mhm,
it's not necessarily tied to any kind of like reliving the past, then there really is something to be said for that. Then the game obviously has, like a tangible appeal to it,
mhm,
at least for you. I mean, again, that game's not going to be for everybody, but
for sure.
definitely the B movie kind of, aspect to it, and just it's so cheesy, the so bad it's good kind of thing, that
Yep.
definitely applies when it comes to Corpse Killer. But you've also been up to a ton of editing, am I right? Like
Yes.
you're at the helm of the mainline podcast now, and we have rebooted our mainline podcast that we started all the way back in 2017, right?
17. Can you believe it? Hey, I mean, that just blows
Yeah.
my mind. That just blows my mind. So yes, that's been a lot of fun. It's obviously it's a ton of work as it always has
Hmm.
been, and the challenge is being able to get everybody together at the same time to record a solid episode. There's inevitably tons and tons of editing that goes into it. I'm currently, and
It
we are
came
in.
out so good
Did it?
though.
Oh, I'm glad. It's.
There's something fun about listening to an episode that I'm not on, to be honest with you. And I just love listening to, you, Nick, and Ben talk about your, experiences with these games. And yeah, to a degree, it's kind of like stepping outside and
Hmm,
kind of
hmm,
like being on the outside looking in. And, because I record these casts,
hmm,
so it's
hmm,
like when I'm listening back to a cast that I'm in, I'm kind of being more critical, and I'm not focusing as much on the, what it's about versus like the production quality, or, things that might need to be edited and stuff. Whereas when I'm just listening to you guys, I'm just like, this is really fun. I love Saturn, and I love listening to
hmm,
these
hmm.
experts talk about their experience with it, so it was a great cast, and you did a marvelous job editing it. Pat, of course, did an amazing and outstanding job editing the cast for years, but I think that he's happy to get a
To
break
take,
now,
yeah, for well, I mean, to be honest, you guys are involved in the SHIRO show every Friday. Like that's a huge commitment too. So,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
happy to take this on for myself, and it's fun. And the goal with this is, just as the SHIRO show is sort of very impromptu and sort of, yes, you guys go through a certain format, but it's interactive. Folks are talking and everything. Whereas this is a lot more structured and produced. So it's a different flavor, but ultimately it's about the same, overall
Right.
topic. So yeah, just really glad that it's been relaunched. And at the time of this recording, we've just launched episode 1. Episode 2 is queued up and ready to go, and I'm about halfway through editing episode 3. So one of our big
Mhm.
goals here is just to maintain consistency with our releases, and it looks like we're well on track to do that. So yeah, that's it's exciting stuff.
And people have asked about the frequency, and I believe that it is bi-monthly, meaning that it's every 2 months,
That's
correct?
correct. Yes. And that,
Right.
at the end of the day, this isn't a full-time job for any of us. It takes an immense amount of time to edit and prepare these things, not to mention the scheduling of trying to get everybody together for several hours, that's a big commitment. So rather than committing to something more frequent where, the likelihood of us dropping off or failing to make a deadline would be higher, I figured every
Mhm.
2 months we could put out a really solid quality, multi-hour cast. So that's what we're going to try. And so far, so good.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan because we've done the, boom, boom, boom,
Hmm.
putting out episodes over the years, and it leads to burnout.
Oh,
But
100%.
um, but this way it's much more sustainable. And of course, folks who are, plugged into the feed will be getting Editor's Corner. They'll also be getting the Shiro show, the uploads from the Shiro show that we do. So there's going to be plenty of content to keep folks entertained in the meantime.
Definitely.
Um,
Definitely.
I myself have been, what have I been doing? I mean, obviously Shiro show, been listening to a lot of podcasts lately. And then one little thing that I did that I might have talked about with Peter or Pat, can't remember, was, going through and doing this Excel spreadsheet where I kind of was nailing down dates when I got certain consoles, dates that were important to my gaming history, personal gaming history, much so that I don't have to make stuff up when we're talking on the show or when I'm talking with Peter, because memory is a fickle thing, especially the older that we get. So the exercise in creating like a timeline, if you will, was really just to kind of nail down those memories. And for myself, it helped kind of ground my
Hmm.
history and my memories in like this very real, like, okay, it was 91 that my sister got her Genesis, and I had that memory, but it wasn't like grounded. Now it's anchored down to a date and everything. And so out of that spun this idea to do like a dramatic retelling of my childhood gaming memories, which I recently uploaded and went live, and a lot of folks had good reactions to it and positive feedback. So I'll probably be doing like a part 2, but that was a lot of fun. And that story of my sister's Genesis, and this would have not been the very early Altered Beast Genesis, but this would have been the Sonic pack-in Genesis
Hmm.
with,
Hmm.
Sonic running on the front. And I was like, I want to reacquire that,
Yeah.
but again, my OCD means that it has to be in pristine condition, and of course, the fact that I like to get things for a deal, but I also want them to be pristine, those two do not
Those don't.
reconcile
Yeah.
with
No,
each
they
other.
really don't.
So you can so you can imagine how hard it is, like how long I'm going to have to wait to find some kind of crazy deal. But in the meantime, I did pick up something that I have no nostalgia for because I have never owned one, and that is a Model 2 Sega Genesis. And I
Mm.
unboxed it on the Shiro show, and it's actually, I got a pristine. So it is the core system, right? It's pristine. The box, very, very little shelfware or anything like that, right? So it looks like I just pulled it off the shelf at Kmart in 1995 or whatever. And the system itself is so clean. I took it apart to,
Hmm.
like vacuum it out and everything. And I was like, there's nothing to vacuum out. Like the system is
Nice.
just like, they didn't play it. And I picked it up because the rational, reasonable part of me said, I'm spending so much time trying to reacquire this, big, bulky system for whatever reason, that's driving me to want to do this. But the much more sensible thing would be to get it like a Model 2 because it takes up so much less space, right?
Mm.
And so I was able to, I don't have any space to put another console in my setup. It's just completely packed with fifth and sixth generation consoles. Um, and so I was able to fit the little Genesis up on top of my monitor there.
Hmm. Hmm.
It just takes up a lot less space, and it looks great with the 32X on top.
Yes.
Honestly, as much as I love the original like high definition graphics, that is my go-to Model 1, It looks kind of wonky with the CD extender and
Yeah.
the 32X on top. It's just got kind of a little bit
Yeah.
ugly. But by itself, it's amazing. And like there's always room for one more console. So yeah. Anyway, I've been getting back into Sega Genesis and playing that stuff. I know you were like for the last month or two
Yes.
delving back into your Genesis
Yeah.
stuff, and you got the Mega EverDrive Pro, yeah,
Yes.
that can play Sega CD games and stuff. So that's rad.
Hmm.
But yeah, so the process of all of this, the process of endless days of indecision about all
Hmm.
of this, just to ultimately grab this Model 2, and it was like $99 shipped, right? So that was awesome. It was really a score, but the thing is, it got me thinking, like, why does it matter? Like I have all these like irrational reasons that it has to be one thing. I've passed up so many great deals because it doesn't meet like this very fine requirement that I have in my head of like what I really want, right? It's so intangible, it's so personal,
Hmm.
right? So that's what we're talking about today. It was kind of a long intro and everything, but what we're talking about today are the intangible sides of retro gaming. Okay, because so much of what we deal with here is tangible. You know, game carts, boxes, consoles, monitors, tangible stuff. You know, and you can kind of quantify one thing is better than another and stuff. But there are so many intangible sides of retro gaming, and those are like nostalgia,
Hmm.
huge intangible factor, addiction, which is somewhat intangible but very very real, and then OCD. You know,
Hmm.
I think that you could even go farther to put like hoarding in there, but I think the hoarding is like a combination of addiction and OCD.
Can be,
You
yeah,
know,
for sure.
so basically the trifecta of nostalgia, addiction, and OCD is kind of what we're talking about today.
The
um,
dark triad of gaming.
we are not scientists. Well, Peter's got a degree in psychology, so I guess you could say we're.
Well, yeah, but I'm gonna try to shoot a lot from memory and my own experiences rather than necessarily delving into the research and what have
Mhm,
you. I'll bring it in, I guess, if it's appropriate, but I really, as we do on Editor's Corner, try to just sort of pull from my own past and what I may have been feeling and why I may have been making certain
mhm.
choices and so on, right? Because I think this is just such a fascinating topic.
Well, I want to kick it off by asking you a question. Have you, in recent years, or I don't know, in the past decade, like has there been a time where you have sat down with something and you've booted it up and it just hasn't been what you remembered? This isn't as good as I remember it. I'm just
Oh,
curious.
sure. And I mean, just as I was talking about in our intro, like Virtua Fighter 3 on Dreamcast, it's a game that you see the sort of flaws, you see, that, oh, okay, this was a bit lazy here, it's a bit, short over there, and it's something that I'm not sure I'm going to spend a huge amount of time with going forward, I
Mhm.
guess. So that's probably the most recent example I can think of.
Yeah, just last night I came out to the garage and I was playing some Sega Genesis, you know? And there's a game that I grew up with that I absolutely loved as a kid. That's Jurassic Park.
Mm.
Okay. Jurassic Park on the Genesis. It was released around the time of the movie, right? And the movie just blew my mind, you know? Uh, Absolutely impacted the game industry, you know, with silicon graphics and that kind of technology, you know. And of course it had several game iterations and stuff like that. But man, playing that game last night, it's brutally difficult.
Sure is.
And I could not, I swear I could not, as Grant at least, I could not get past the first level. And I asked myself, like, why do I have so many great memories of this game? Is it just because like I sat there with my sister and brother and took the punishment
Mhm,
and like
mhm.
persevered through it and had fun despite all of its flaws, you know? I mean, the fact is I liked the graphics. I liked the kind of atmosphere and ambiance that the game presented. And of course, as crude as it is today, you know, compared to what we're used to, it did a good job kind of dropping you down into that vibe. You know, you had the T-Rex face with the flashing lights, and then
Mhm,
the
mhm.
cage breaks and everything like that, and then it shows you the map, and then now you're in like this deep dark jungle and you're kind of doing the flashback style platforming, you know. But I mean, again, it's just so brutally difficult and unfair. You know?
Sure is, yeah.
And so yeah, it could just be that I'm old now and that my reflexes aren't great. But yeah, so I sat here and I was just like, wow, yeah, it's disappointing. I love looking at the box and reading the manual and firing it up for the sounds and stuff, but I just don't know how much I'm gonna actually be playing this, you know?
Interesting,
Yeah,
interesting.
so
I so playing that game, I kind of agree with you. The presentation is really good, like it really
mhm.
kind of ties in with the movie very nicely, but it is insanely difficult. I've only ever finished it with Grant. I've never been able to finish it with the Raptor. Um,
Oh wow, okay.
so that's but oh man, that took, and this was a recent, I'd say within the last,
Yeah.
say, 5 years, I played it through, but it definitely was frustrating. 100% was frustrating, and it was definitely a case of this is something where I'm going to have to die 4 or 5 times in certain sections before I really kind of get a certain timing down or whatever, figure something out before I can proceed. So it's got its charm. It's got its, good points, obviously. But yeah, it's definitely not a pick up and play for 30 minutes type of game. You know what I mean? It just does not allow you to do
Right.
that. So that's, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Definitely.
Like I remember getting to the part with I don't think I ever beat the game, to be honest with you, but I remember getting to the part with the river raft,
Yep.
and I remember getting to a part with the T-Rex. So I have a lot of memories of the game, but again, like it's just yeah, it's brutally difficult, and they never learned because honestly, Lost World on the Saturn is very much the same for me. Like I have very good nostalgic feelings of playing it back in the day with my brother,
Hmm.
and we got to the T-Rex. I think we actually beat Lost World, to be honest with you, but it might have been him. It might have
Hmm.
been him and I watched. And now I can't for the life of me persist with that game because it is just there's not enough good feelings and good vibes, to
Hmm.
overshadow
Hmm.
just how unfair the game is, even on easy difficulty or whatever. John Williams' score is great and everything. I think I talked about this in our
Hmm.
games that we either hated back then and love today, or we loved back then and hate today.
Yep.
I wouldn't say that I hate it, and it's on my shelf, but I just don't think I'll be firing it up anytime soon.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, again, like it's kind of a big disappointment when you kind of remember something being really great and then you turn it on and you realize that it's not really that great, and that yeah, I've noticed that with modern remakes today, it's like they have to create like an HD remake of it just to give folks the same feeling that they had playing the original. Like with the Metroid Prime remake, for example, a lot of folks play this modern HD remake and they're like, okay, yeah, this gives me the same feeling I had back then playing it for the first time. Because back then it was mind blowing
Hmm.
visually,
Hmm.
it was, like, and of course, but when you play it today, it's nothing special because of everything we've been exposed to subsequently, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you almost have to play the remaster to kind of feel like, yes, this is what I remember. I remember it being mind blowing, basically.
But okay, so even though you take a game like Jurassic Park and you look at it now and it's not really quite as good as you remember it, would you ever sell or otherwise get rid of your copy of that game or even the Saturn version or anything like that?
I don't think so because, and that's where like it's kind of irrational, right? I mean, if I was a more sensible person that didn't have any kind of shred of sentimentality, then it would make no sense for it to live rent free in my house, like taking up space,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But I do have feelings and emotions associated with this physical object. Okay, it's like what it represents, right?
Hmm.
And again, like this is so stupid. It's so intangible. I shouldn't say it's stupid because it's real, right? And a lot of people can
Oh,
relate to
tons, I'm
this.
sure. Yeah.
But again, like it begs the question: if you have an EverDrive and you have a ROM of it on the EverDrive and you could play it, it's at your fingertips, right? Do you really need to hold on to that physical memento?
Hmm.
How? And I'm sure that there are different games with different scales of how much impact or how much meaning they hold for you. But I don't know. I am definitely a lot like you in that I like the physical memento.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
not just shelf candy. Like I don't really show off my game library that much. And it wouldn't be much to look at anyway because it's in a garage, but it's what it means to me.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
how about you? I mean, I think that you're on the same page, right?
Totally. And, I was just thinking of another good example. Growing up on the Genesis, I loved the Sonic games. Got into it. It got my attention with Sonic 1, but it really took off with Sonic 2. Loved Sonic 3.
Mm,
It totally enjoyed Sonic and Knuckles. Anyways, later came the Saturn, and I got Sonic Jam. So now I've got these games all on a disc, and it's a really, really good port, you know.
it really is.
So do I get rid of my Genesis carts? And for me, the answer is no. But logically, like, why? I mean, they're the exact same game, right? I mean, yes, one's on a
Yes.
cartridge, one's on a CD, but the experience you're going to get out of it, it's the same. So why is it that I want to hang on to all of that and not let some of it go? And to your point, now that I've got a Genesis EverDrive, not only are all the original editions loaded onto my EverDrive, but so are, fan hacks and, fan, mods and all that stuff. So why hang on to all that stuff? And yet I can't let it go, because I think
Right.
part of that sort of nostalgia or those happy memories or happy feelings are not just associated with the experience of playing the game, although yes, that's a big part of it, but I think it's also associated with, physically holding that box or that cartridge and,
Mm.
looking
Hmm.
at the artwork, leafing through the manual. Like it's all like there's an attachment to the physical object that is separate, I think, from the experience of actually playing the game, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it does. So just got a brand new, to me, Model 2 Genesis, right?
Mm,
And I happen to have several, hard box copies of Genesis games, right? And so I brought Jesse into the garage here, and I slapped in Sonic the Hedgehog, the original one, right?
hmm.
He's played it multiple times. Okay. He's played it on the Wii, he's played it on the Switch, he's played it on the Sonic Jam collection, right?
Right.
So I
Yeah.
mean, he's very familiar. And I mean, he loves the movies, he loves Sonic. He's very familiar with this game, but he has never played it on real hardware. And I put the cart in and I'm like, here, this is what I've been talking about. Like, I understand that to him, the idea of the console that it came from is completely foreign. He's familiar
Sure.
with the game, but it just the experience of what it actually came from. And I was like, this is where it all started. Like, Sonic did not exist before this. This is where it
Mm-hmm.
started. Here is the game playing on physical raw hardware. It's a real cart and it's the original hardware. This is as real as it gets, even though it doesn't actually look as good as like the upscaled Switch version, that he plays. The funny thing is, it didn't impress him nearly as much as I thought it would. He's just like, okay,
Yeah, I was
yeah.
going to
So
ask what his reaction was. Yeah.
his reaction was just like, oh yeah, yeah, that's neat, daddy.
And that's it,
but
eh? Yeah.
but I think that it just impresses me so much more than it does him.
Sure.
Because to me, I think like this is like a classic car with an old carburetor, and everything. Like this is just as raw as you can possibly get when it comes to this game, you know? And that to me, I don't know, that tickles a certain nerve, I guess, for me. Like that
Mm-hmm.
means a lot to be playing it on a real cart on a real system. But
Hmm.
that might mean absolutely nothing to someone else. I mean, my son is a great example. It means nothing to him.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that he doesn't love the game, and that in the future he might not have some good memories associated with the original Sonic game, but he doesn't derive any kind of like positive memories from like the actual hardware itself, because for him, his experience of playing that game has been on several different pieces of hardware. So it's
Sure.
just been
Yeah.
diluted, that side of things has been diluted for him.
So that kind of reminds me. So, way back in the day when I was heavily into video gaming in general, like Sega and Saturn and all that were always at the forefront. But ultimately, as the Saturn started fading out in the West, I did end up getting both a PlayStation and a Nintendo 64.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up building up, especially for the 64, a fairly significant library
Nice.
of all the hits that are now extremely expensive,
Extreme. Okay.
from all the Nintendo games to things like Harvest Moon, 64, like you name it, and I had it.
Yeah.
And years ago, I sold it all
Really?
because I'm more than happy to play it on a 64 with, say, an EverDrive
Okay.
or the Virtual Console, which is my go-to now,
Mm-hmm.
that I've had on the Wii, now transferred to a Wii U. Um, because I don't have the sentimental attachment to the physical boxes, cartridges, and manuals of the Nintendo 64 stuff
Mm-hmm.
in the same way that I do for the Sega stuff. I
Okay, fair.
couldn't, you
Yeah.
couldn't, you couldn't pay me to sell my Sega physical stuff away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I did manage to let go of all of my 64 stuff, and there's no regret whatsoever. I don't miss it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I enjoy the fact that it's not taking up a ton of space. You know what I mean? Like,
True. I mean, it does. Those carts take it. Yeah, I could agree with you there. We had a Nintendo 64 in the house. Subsequently, later, when my brother kind of like did a system swap with a friend,
mhm,
and so it came into our house and with several unboxed games, and we kind of played it. And so I do have some nostalgia there of the experience playing the games.
mhm.
Definitely have nostalgia of that summer 96 when people were playing Mario 64 on the kiosks in the mall and stuff like that. And
Yes.
just how much of an impact that game had on the gaming industry and on me as a kid, just like having never seen anything like that before. So I mean, it definitely is a kick to hold one of those Trident controllers, love them or hate them, and play Mario 64 on real hardware. You know, as fun as it can be on, you know, the virtual console or whatever, it really is a kick to play something like that, or, you know, F-Zero on the Nintendo 64 with a real controller, right? But you're right, I don't have any nostalgia for the boxes because I never bought Nintendo 64 games back in the day,
Mm-hmm,
or took
mm-hmm.
them home and read the manuals, or looked at the boxes fondly. Like I guess I remember them packing in the expansion pack with the boxes and seeing them in the store. And you know, I guess I remember looking at Nintendo 64 boxes in the game stores and stuff like that. But again, that's not enough to have me want to, you know, hoard them on my shelf. Whereas I'm much like you with the Saturn, like it's almost like off limits. I'll sell a kidney, you know, or I'll sell my guitars. Like guitar, I have a bunch of guitars, right? And I don't have any sentimental attachment to any of those. Like I could get a new guitar, right?
Mm.
Guitars are a dime a dozen. You just go onto whatever music site and drop like $300 and get a new guitar. I can't just easily get all these Sega Saturn games again, you know? So when people talk about, oh, well, you know, sell those if in a medical emergency or something, I'm like, no,
No, no, no, no.
just take the kidney.
Unbelievable. But I get it. I get it. You know, I obviously I remember the Nintendo 64 stuff being on the shelves, and you know, Nintendo did a decent job with packaging and
Mhm.
keeping their template throughout the 64's life cycle. You know, so there should be enough there to trigger it at the very least, you know, the OCD in you, right? But it
Yeah,
still
yeah,
just
yeah.
doesn't really do it for me. Again, and to be honest, you know, for the most part, I've been playing any Nintendo 64 games I've needed to or wanted to through Virtual Console. But not too long ago, I pulled out the actual physical N64 because the only thing I've got left from that entire collection is just the console hookups and a few controllers. And I just, you
Mm.
know, opened it up, cleaned it, whatever. And then I held the controller and I started cleaning it. And my God, it is a terrible, horrendous controller, that Trident. Everything about it sucks. And I'm just thinking to myself, if I ever do get an EverDrive for the 64, which I think I might, that might be the way I go, I will definitely have to buy a more modern aftermarket controller to go for it. And again, you know, if there was some sentimentality there or nostalgia, I would swear that off. I would, of course, use
Mm.
the original Trident controller. And I don't remember it being horrendously bad at the time. But holding this thing now, it is awkward. It's uncomfortable. The buttons suck. The joystick, like it just, anyway, I could go on, but they're not, yeah, I mean,
I mean, to be honest with you, I'm holding it right now. I love it, hate it. You know, like I have a
mm,
love-hate relationship with this. First of all, the cord is like really thin compared to anything we were used to with like the Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis. The cord on this is like really flimsy. That's not great. The stick to me feels pretty good actually. I don't know. I know that these things wear out, but I know how to repair them, and so mine are you know, all the sticks I've tightened them up. It is strange though. At the same time, it's so counterintuitive that they would release this thing
mm-hmm.
with a D-pad that pretty much nobody ever touched. You know, and I mean,
Agreed.
even
Yes.
back in the day, I was just like, okay, so I don't have three hands. How do I use this? So
Mm-hmm.
wait a second, it's just superfluous, and you just ignore it because of course you have the Z trigger on in the middle.
Yep.
So if you're trying to use and I've seen people say, "Oh, well, you know, I hold it like a regular controller and I reach my thumb to the middle." I'm like, "Yeah, but how do you do the Z trigger? Like, are you seriously like doing it with your middle finger or whatever?" I don't know. So anyway, it is definitely a lot like the Dreamcast controller. That's not a perfect one either, but
That's
it's
true.
like
Fair. Yeah.
it turns heads. You know, it turned heads back in the day,
Oh, of
and
course it did.
it definitely like shook up the I guess the standard for like what is a controller, what should a controller look like, because it was just completely going in the opposite direction of
Mhm,
anything. And
mhm.
but you know, not necessarily for better, right? And of course when you get that bulky
The Rumble
what
Pack,
Rumble
you're
Pack
thinking?
with
Yeah,
the battery in it and everything like that, it like weighs it down like so much. You're just like, so
totally.
I don't know. I guess the nostalgia that I do have attached to this is all of that from back in the day, like thinking like, what a weird design. And, I guess it is a love-hate relationship that I have with that controller, but
Interesting.
the build quality is definitely not up to par with even like what Sony put out. Sony's controllers were actually pretty solid.
Yeah, like as much as I rag on Sony's initial controllers, like they got okay once they added the twin analog sticks, but the original, the initial, the plain one that just had digital input was bad too. Like I just,
Mhm.
but again, the shock value, like, oh my goodness, this is totally different. It's new, it's blah blah blah. And maybe it was a way to sort of stand out from the crowd and say, hey, look at what Sega's put out. It's, totally the same as they've always done. And yet, the
Mhm.
Saturn pad, at least the Japanese one anyways, endures to this day as a fabulous, fabulous controller. So
Yeah.
it's, it is weird from that perspective. Definitely.
You mentioned the nostalgia and the great feelings you have about associated with the boxed Saturn collection, though, and how you have a complete complete long box collection, and I'm just,
Mm-hmm.
how irrational is it though? Just bear with me here. How irrational is it though that you prefer those over the Japanese jewel cases, which are arguably take up less space, have better artwork on them, and largely, have better versions of the games. I mean, Bug is more playable, a Stall is more playable.
Oh,
You
totally.
have access to like this entire library of great games that go beyond what we got in the States. So it's like, how irrational is it that we prefer? It must be this ugly copy of Rainbow Islands.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
100%. And to me, the most salient example, the game that really kind of got me hooked on the Sega Saturn was the original Panzer Dragoon, which has amazingly hand drawn,
Yes.
cover art on the Japanese jewel case.
Mobius, right?
And it has this, right. Yeah. And it has this, horrendously primitive 3D,
Render.
you know, yeah, with a black background that doesn't even take up the, anyway, it's just bad.
It's not aesthetic.
No, no, and yet that's what's on my shelf, and I do like it. It has a
That's what we got. So that's, yeah.
yeah. So it's so as much as I rag on, for example, the N64 controller, for folks who were Nintendo fans and really got into the 64,
Mhm.
I'm sure they appreciate that controller.
Mm.
For maybe what they wanted it to be or what Nintendo wanted it to be or whatever. And same with because you're right. I mean, logically, why don't I have Japanese versions of a whole lot of these games, language barrier aside, and you
But you
know
don't have nostalgia for those.
I don't.
Even though they, like I say, arguably, there's so much to love about the Japanese versions of the games, the OB cards and everything. Like, for somebody who has OCD, like I love
Hmm,
the
hmm.
fact that they have all this extra stuff, stickers. A lot of them come with stickers inside. Like I have my copy of Initial D came with like the OB strip and the stickers inside and all this extra paperwork. Lots of it in Japanese that I can't understand, or at least only halfway understand. But I mean, um, many of my Japanese box games are like very substantial what you get, and of course that's just not what we got in the States as kids. And yet here we are, sitting here with all this nostalgia over the crap that we got in the States. I
Yep.
mean, arguably the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation US libraries, they looked a lot more impressive. I mean, the Nintendo 64 boxes, they're cardboard, so that sucks. But the box art and the design of the boxes, it looked very striking. And the artwork was pretty good, overall. PlayStation, really nice looking library, good looking artwork, and of course cases that don't take up a lot of space. Saturn, we got a lot of really, I mean, just look at it. Look at the spines. You look at the cover art. Got a lot of really wonky looking artwork on the US side of things, for the Saturn. And yet that's what we got. So those are the memories that we formed.
Yeah, and it's I think the moment that I realized that the nostalgia will win out over the aesthetic of it
Hmm.
was there was a time where it seemed like everybody and their dog were creating customs of Saturn games. Everybody was doing it.
Everybody and
Um,
their dog. Love it. Yeah.
absolutely.
They still
And
are, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not something that's gone away, but it just seemed to be way more sort of in your face
In
out
your
there
face.
for a
Yeah.
period of time. Anyways, it always bothered me that the original packed-in Virtua Fighter game here in North America came in a standard jewel case, and virtually everything else was in a long box. So you've
Yes.
got all your
Yes.
games in a shelf, and then you've got this one, and I realize there's a few others, but you've got this one small standard jewel case. The manual obviously is just a fold-out poster. Like it obviously didn't match or didn't fit. And there was
Right.
a fellow who made an amazing Virtua Fighter 1 custom box. It was a long box. They
Yeah.
took great care to make sure that the art was, in line with what was being used at the time,
Hmm.
during that time period, everything. And to me, it was a no brainer. Like, yeah, this is what I need. This is what I want.
Hmm.
Um, and in time, I found that I don't appreciate the custom nearly as much as I do the original, even though the original may have been arguably lower quality. It doesn't fit with the rest of the you know what I mean? Like it just
Oh yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Christmas Lights is another example. You've made just the
Right.
standard de facto custom for Christmas Nights, and for a very long time, it was on my shelf alongside all the other releases, as if that was what had come out, and you
Right.
couldn't really even tell looking at it that it was
Right.
anything other than that. And yet, I find that I'm defaulting back to the sleeve
Yeah.
because that's what initially this is. That's to me is the real genuine.
Yeah.
And that's what that's what the attachment is.
That is a great example of like OCD, because on one aspect, you want them all to match. You want everything
Hmm.
on your shelf to be uniform and match, right? And that's OCD right there. At least it's a mild form. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, because I know that there are actual people who actually suffer from severe OCD. Okay. So it's just, let's just call it CD, compulsive disorder. But I mean, essentially, you want them all to match. And at the same time, you're like, but I also want it to be, historically accurate and contextual, right?
Yeah.
So that the two sides are like warring with each other. And for me, I just go, why not both, right?
Hmm.
So it's like I have the sleeve and I keep it alongside, the original, right? But absolutely, like, what do you do? Whatever you got to do to justify it to yourself, And again, these are just such intangible things that are going to matter to one person and be completely irrelevant to someone else. They're gonna be like, why are you wasting so much time with this?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you ever try to like recreate? How do I put this? Like, there are times when I've tried to go on a vacation or something like that, and you try to go back to a place that you had a really good experience with or a very good time, but then when you go back, it's not the same,
Yep.
or it doesn't fill you with the same kind of emotions that you had at that time,
Totally.
because what you may not realize is that context was so important. What was going on in your life. For example, I've had different girlfriends in my lifetime, right? And this is so funny. Like, one girlfriend that I'd had where I took her to, I don't know, some place where we had a good experience, right? And then, of course, I'm dating another girl down the road, and I try taking her to the same place because I think that, it'll be like, oh, this will be great, and it's just totally different because the context is not there. You're different people. Time has passed, maybe the place has changed. Maybe it's gone downhill, right?
Yes.
Trying to recreate past experiences, I think, is an exercise in failure, because it's almost never going to be the same, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I only say all of that, which has nothing to do with gaming, to illustrate the point that we often try to do that now with retro gaming. We try to, recreate a situation that we experienced in the past. And again, not all the parts are there. You might have the console and you might have the game, and heck, you might even have like an old CRT to play it on. So you've got part of it, but maybe you don't have the same people surrounding you on the couch.
Right.
Maybe the relationship that you had with your brother when you were little kids isn't the same relationship that you have with him now.
Of course.
Maybe you had more time to just persevere with a game that really sucked back then, and you didn't have choice.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
were not like flooded with like an EverDrive with so many games on it, that you're crippled by inability to choose. Whereas you literally was just like, here's your game.
Hmm.
You play
Hmm.
this game, it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the NES.
Oh my.
Good luck.
Yeah. Have fun. Yeah.
you you do what you have to. You get good, you know?
Yes. So, okay, I'm gonna tell you about two experiences, gaming related, to on this topic that you're talking about. One which turned out really good, and one which turned out very poorly, really. So,
Okay.
um, just as the Saturn faded, and just before I got into importing, there was a brief period of time where it was a lot of PlayStation gaming for me, and what I ended up picking up a game. It ultimately became my favorite PlayStation game to this date for the original PlayStation,
Mm,
and that is the RPG Chrono Cross. You know, Lots of people don't compare it favorably to Trigger and all that, whatever, that doesn't matter. I never played Trigger, so my only experience is with Cross. So Chrono Cross, great game, loved it, played
it
it
is.
through, had a good time, shelved it, haven't touched it in years and years and years and years. Not because it's a bad game, but just, life,
Right.
whatever. Anyways, not too long ago, just very recently, Square remastered, well, I should say Square Enix, they remastered Chrono Cross and released it on modern platforms. So I ended up picking up the physical edition of Chrono Cross for the Nintendo Switch. And it's essentially the same game, except the visuals have been bumped up to high fidelity. So they
Mm,
haven't been reworked. These aren't all new graphics and all new textures, but they're simply upscaled to look super crisp and good on a modern TV. And I hate it. I can't. It doesn't
mhm,
give me any joy. It you know I'm looking at it thinking, okay, but the game is the same, everything's the same, the plot, it's all there, but I
mhm,
can't play this. I for comparison fired up the original Chrono Cross on an original PlayStation, and even though again it's the exact same experience, but with far lower fidelity graphics, it brought it back for me. That was the Chrono Cross that I
mm.
grew up with. So that's an experience
Yes.
where, and that made me really swear off remakes and remasters. There are a lot of
Mhm.
SS tribute, Sega Saturn tribute games coming out,
Oh, right, yeah.
Batsugan, there's tons of them, and I stay
Mhm.
away from all of them. I have no
Well,
interest.
it's emulation, right,
Yeah, essentially,
on the
right? And
Switch, and not always great emulation, and
not
lots
always
of lag.
precisely, and I just
Yeah.
no thank you. And yes, I guess arguably there are some remasters that are done really well,
Yeah.
but they're few and far between for me, to be honest.
I don't discourage folks from trying them if they don't have access, you know? I mean, because that's the
100%.
thing, it's all about access. We have access to the, so I mean, and if you have it on a Saturn, why not? Just play it on that. It's going to be the best, right? But yeah, so for a lot of folks, they're, easily accessible copies of, and probably the best chance they'll have to play those games. So, but yeah, I'm right there with you. Like it's a tough sell. And they recently remastered Grandia,
Yes.
like I'd rather just
No,
play it on a
thank
Saturn,
you. 100%.
with the chunky graphics and stuff, because it looks fake, and I don't know why like I choose that word fake, but I mean it just doesn't look real. It doesn't look as it should.
It doesn't satisfy the expectation you have in your mind, I think.
Yeah, it's
You know?
bizarre. Like your brain, how your brain is used to seeing 24 frames per second. And when you see that fake you see that fake motion applied, 60 frame
Mhm, mhm.
interpolation applied to 24 frame source material, your brain just goes like, this is uncanny valley. Like I don't
Yes.
like what I see here because it just doesn't look natural. I've been trained I've to recognize 24 frames per second and be okay with that, and then of course, like anytime you see something that is 60 frames per second and it's truly natively 60 frames per second, it either looks like a video game, or we grew up seeing like home video
Mhm,
having that kind of, that look to it, where the frame rate was much higher,
mhm.
versus what you would see in the cinema. But yeah, it's really crazy. All the TVs nowadays come with that just kind of on by default, and old folks don't know how to turn it off. That's the first thing I do when I go over to my father-in-law's house is like, turn this off because
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
I cannot watch this.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you're right. I'm with you. Yeah.
So let me just kind of get into an experience I had recently, which did everything just right in
Okay.
terms of
Oh, I think
bringing.
I know what it is. I think I know what it is, but go ahead.
So I'm curious. It's gaming related, I guess, but it's not a game per se.
Okay.
Um, so Nick Pandemonium,
Yes.
our friend, does his review slash documentary videos. Does a great job. For anyone who has not somehow, watched or consumed Nick's content, highly, highly encourage you to do so. It's just fantastic. Anyways, not
It
too
is.
long ago, he did a really long, like I think it was 4.5 hour long documentary on Virtua Cop. And what that did is it wasn't just a showcase of the original game and how it played and all the rest of it, but it added a whole lot of, um, you know, time, um, time appropriate references, extra material, research, and a whole lot of video clips
Hmm.
of that particular time period. And it really brought me back to, okay, this is exactly what my brain has been craving to consume. You know,
Yes.
it, I don't care much for, people's opinions today of games from yesteryear because
Right.
they lack the soul of the experience, the context of the experience, if you will. But by virtue of researching, how these games were made, by talking to the folks and listening to the stories, of the folks who were involved in making these games, and finding footage of what it was like, and it really puts you back into that moment where those good memories were created. And that to me
Hmm.
is that's success.
Yes.
Remastering a game and giving it higher fidelity visuals does not bring me back to the moment where those good memories were created. But a product like Nick's videos tends to do that, and that's what
Hmm.
I find intensely appealing.
Yeah.
So that's an example of something that's done really well.
Yeah. Like the Cowabunga collection is a somewhat recent release of just huge compilation of Ninja Turtles games, right? And rather than like upscaling, rather than really like doing any kind of treatment to the games itself, they're just curated and portrayed with context of like all of the feelies and the comics and the ads and stuff from back in the day. There's like a sewer that you can kind of like a museum that you can go through and you can kind of look at all of the ephemera, you know,
Hmm.
and kind of soak up the context of when they were released and stuff like that. And I mean, either the games are for you or they're not. But the games really haven't been treated at all. That you could just fire them. There may be like a layer there where you're able to do save states or stuff like that. That you wouldn't have been able to do. But for the most part, you could just fire up the game and play it the way that you did. And I think that that's probably a better way to treat these games than trying to like upscale them through some kind of AI. It
Hmm.
just always ends up looking cheap and fake. And I
Hmm.
agree with you too that it's like opinions are a dime a dozen. So watching a game review on YouTube or something is kind of like going to be hit or miss because it's just somebody's opinion, and
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
either agree with them and then they're preaching to the choir, or you disagree with them and you're typing in the comments like, I disagree with you, but what does it matter? um, like what Nick does and what like Norman Caruso, the game historian, those folks really do delve into the history and provide context, and context is so important. That's why I love
Huge.
gaming magazines so much, is the ability to go back and see what people were writing and what people were thinking back then, and it helps jog my memory and be like, oh yeah, so if you look at a certain game in the light of and the context of when it was released, you might feel a lot different about it.
Oh, totally. Well, I was just thinking, like just lately I've been enjoying Corpse Killer. One of the characters in Corpse Killer is a horrendous stereotype. He's like this, black dreadlocks, Rastafarian, like just a terrible, terrible stereotype. This would never ever fly today. And it is, it's borderline offensive. And yet you put it in the context of when this game came out, mid 1990s,
Mm,
that was not our society's attitude back then, and so the game
mm-mm.
makes sense in the context of time. So it's that
Yeah.
kind of stuff that it makes all the difference.
Yeah. The 90s were, I mean, arguably not as progressive. Well, no, they not even arguably. They just weren't as progressive as we are nowadays. And so, yeah, certain things that came out then just would not be released today,
Absolutely.
It wouldn't fly. But yeah, you're definitely right there. It's funny though, there are definitely some old games that are not great, from a performance aspect or even from a visual aspect that somehow I have latched onto and found something to love, even though I don't have any nostalgia attached to it. Take Congo, for example. Okay.
Mm,
Congo is a game that people love to trash on Congo. Okay.
yep.
Either because it's, visually unimpressive, they think, or it's kind of crude in its, because it's like a first person shooter and it's very early.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to contend with, using the shoulder triggers to strafe. It has to. It's pre dual stick.
Yep.
It might have even been pre 3D control pad. I'm not sure. It's pre analog. But either way, Congo is just kind of like this crude representation of like a first person shooter on the Saturn. And I didn't play it back in the day. I actually came to this game through Peter. I approached it after reading your article. The game does an amazing job of establishing mood. It does it
Mm,
does an amazing job of recreating the kind of atmosphere and ambiance that you would feel being dropped in the middle of the Congo of
mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
jungle. Even as crude as the graphics might be, everything from the cutscenes, which are kind of campy but also well done, I think, and the color palette and the sounds and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that's very well done about it.
Yep.
And it turns out that it's a jumping jack game, right? It's Leland, same guy who did the Gen War game, and
Yep.
which Nick has covered extensively and did an interview with him. So I'm really looking forward to when he covers Congo, because I want to hear more about like what went into the creation of that game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's so easy for some talking head on YouTube to get in front of the camera and trash a game. But it's much more difficult but rewarding for someone like Nick to go and find out what it took to make that game, and like all the stories that can be told in the process of making this game that probably won't ever get as much attention as like a mainline Sega game, because it's just like this
Yep.
poor selling third party game that's never going to get a lot of attention. But I mean, again, it still has stories to tell, right? And I have no nostalgia for Congo, but it is a game that I really enjoy just because of the fact that I think it does a lot of things well. And so I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you, when it comes to the Saturn specifically, is there a game that you have come to really love that you have no nostalgia for, and you actually find it really enjoyable?
Yeah, one game comes to mind, Impact Racing.
Really?
Never played it back in the day, only tried it out within the last, say, year and a half. Love it. I went in with no expectation because it's certainly not a well-known game like Daytona or Sega Rally. Typically, third-party games on Saturn were noticeably lower. Typically, were noticeably lower quality than like first-party arcade translations. So, I was going into this game. I got into it because I was testing for compatibility with the floppy disk drive. Like I was going through every single release, and so I fired it up and
Right.
played enough to try to get a save point somewhere to see if it would save to the floppy disk drive. But then I found myself I just kept playing, and it was good, it was fun. Like the visuals kept surprising me, like there were effects, there were different locales and bridges, and anyway. And then the concept of not only racing as well as you can and trying to finish within a certain spot, but also having weapons to be able to take down some opponents and whatever.
Right.
Like it just clicked with me and it worked. It's a game that I really enjoy, and I have no nostalgic attachment to it whatsoever.
Wow.
So yeah, it's totally possible.
Now you've intrigued me. Because I do own a copy of that. It's on my shelf, and I think I've probably fired it up once or twice.
Right.
And again, it's one of those games too that kind of like, it's so obscure third party that I kind of mix it up with games like High Octane, the track
Yep.
fights back. Like I just kind of jumble it together with like that list of like B tier racers.
Hmm.
And there are
Hmm.
many of them. So I need an article from Peter about this game. But I'm definitely going to be giving it another shot because that's great. Yeah.
It's really, it's surprised me. And it's funny because in some ways you can compare it to a Wipeout. I mean, they're both racers. You both,
Oh
you have
yes.
weapons that where
Okay.
you try to take out your enemies, whatever.
Hmm.
And yet I enjoy Impact Racing more than I enjoy Wipeout. As
You
as
do?
crazy as that sounds.
I
So,
mean, and
yeah,
you
like
wrote an amazing Wipeout article too.
yeah, and I mean, Wipeout is not a bad game, and yet
No, it's
Impact
great.
Racing, totally under the radar. Yes, it existed, it came out, it was reviewed, and then it was promptly forgotten about. Nobody's ever talking about this game, and yet I'm really loving it. It's just there's something about it where all the elements come together just right, and it's a very fun experience. You know,
Wow. Okay, so that's a big deal for you to place it above Wipeout. I think we really need an article now, because
about
I
Impact Racing.
want to know. Like, I want to know more about the nuance and stuff. What you find so appealing about this game. I'm definitely going to be
Mhm.
trying it. I'm definitely going to be trying it. That's
Nice.
amazing though. So how do you feel about Sonic Mania? Sonic Mania, I believe, was the reason you bought a Switch, right?
It is, yes, correct.
And so this was an attempt. This was, of course, there's a long line of fan Sonic fan games, right? I mean, so much so that there's even a fan game competition, every
Mhm,
year.
mhm,
And so this was one of those situations where you had a dude who made this really really slick mod of Sonic game, and Sega bought into it, and they were like, okay, so we're going to partner with a fan and bring this to reality. And most of the reception of Sonic Mania was positive.
mhm.
Although subsequently, I've started to hear people kind of roll back and say, why not just play Sonic 3? It's just more of the same, really. So it's like, I've recently heard people kind of saying, like, Sonic Mania is great, but really, when you just strip it down to like a choice between, well, I have 30 minutes here, I could either play Sonic Mania or I could play Sonic 3. I'll just play Sonic 3
Interesting.
because it's like kind of more of the same. But how do you feel? Like, how do you feel about Sonic Mania?
So I think it's a great game. It's done well because it looks like the 16-bit games did. You know what I mean? Like it's not high
Right.
definition. The graphics are pixelated on purpose, like they're blocky on purpose, right?
Hmm.
A lot like the special stage is sort of a throwback or an homage to like the Sonic CD special stages. Um,
Sure.
there's a lot of you could tell that it was made by people who loved the Sonic games. You just feel
Right.
that in it. You know, to be honest, I actually prefer, for the most part, I prefer the new and original levels compared to the sort of reimaginings of the initial zones. And I think the
Right.
game would have been way stronger had it been only levels that were
Original.
original. I mean, maybe start off in Green Hill Zone just to get people into it, and that's it. And everything
Right.
else is original. But it's a long game. It is very well adapted now to, the fact that you can have widescreen, that your color palette isn't limited, and yet it doesn't go crazy with it. You don't have 60 million colors on screen. You still have a fairly sort of compact amount of assets that the game uses and what have you. So it was done well. And I also particularly enjoy the music. Like, by the time we got to Sonic 3, there was a lot of Michael Jackson influence in a lot of the tunes, which, that's a whole nother controversy.
Right.
And while obviously this game doesn't have that, it feels like a good sort of complement. I mean, maybe evolution isn't the right word, but it's certainly complementary of that style. It fits. It's not, because there have definitely been Sonic games that have come out, like Sonic 3D Blast, where as good as the music is, it doesn't sound like Sonic music really. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So yeah, I do enjoy it. I like it, but to me, this isn't a remake or a remaster. It is an all new game.
Yeah.
And if I were to sort of address the criticisms of it's more of the same. I mean, to me, it's iterative. Just
Right.
as Sonic 2 was an iteration of Sonic 1 with some improvements, then Sonic 3 was the same. And to me, Sonic Mania is an iterative improvement over the Sonic formula. And to me, I'm fine with that. That's good.
Do you feel like the impact it's had on you, or the time that you've spent with it, has created any kind of memories that you're going to take into the future, or will you always be looking back at like basically like, will you have
Mm.
any nostalgia for Sonic Mania, or will it really just be kind of like a footnote or like a,
Interesting question.
because that's kind of what I'm wondering.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because again, like I feel like it's a very neat, tidy package, and I definitely feel like it pokes the right, buttons in terms of like feeding that need for more true Sonic. I don't feel like I've developed any kind of memories with it that I'm really like 10 years from now going to look back and say, yeah, Sonic Mania, that was really great. Like, you
No,
know?
and you're right. I don't think I will either. And I don't think, though, that this is because the game did a bad job of creating those memories or whatever. I mean, the game is just fine, but I mean, I experienced Sonic on the Genesis in like my early teenage years, and those are just
Right.
so formative. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and plus we're adults now. We have different, priorities, certainly competing priorities. Our leisure time is at a premium. And,
Right.
if I had to choose what to do with my leisure time when I was a kid, it was mostly like, okay, am I going to play Sonic 2 or Sonic 3? Whereas now it's like, am I going to go outside for a bike ride? Am I going to play with my son? Am I going to
True.
do a million other things, or am I going to sit down with Sonic Mania? And the thing is, like, if I were to sit down with Sonic Mania, I would have a good time, but it wouldn't sort of create the mental, I don't know if it's attachment or whatever, that I think games did back then because of the age that we were at when we were experiencing them, if that makes sense.
Right. It does. And I think that Jesse might have a easier time developing some kind of nostalgia or fond memories of Sonic Mania, because for me, Sonic Mania is just an amplifier, right? It's just a pointer.
Mm,
It's a thing that stands here and points at the originator and says, that is what I'm trying to amplify. That's what I'm trying to boost.
what a great way to put it.
But to him, it might be more of an example of like his first experience with being thrown into like the Sonic
Hmm.
universe and stuff. And, so again, yeah, it's like a signal amplifier, right? And really all it's doing is standing there and saying, like, this is everything that was great about the thing you love so
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
So while I love it, and while it definitely does scratch an itch, it really just makes me want to go back and look at the stuff that it points to.
Hmm.
Whereas I think for a younger generation, it's kind of like an entry point
Yes.
and more of a gateway into Sonic fandom and everything like that. And they might potentially something that they'll look back on and have fond memories of.
But see, I look at what Patrick, my son, who is 6 years old, like what he is into in terms of gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Because at this age and the intensity with which he plays these games, I am positive that as an older man, he will eventually look back on these games with the same fondness and nostalgia that we are dealing with. And it's things like Minecraft, it's things like
Oh yeah.
Roblox, and finding
Yes.
Chomix and all this stuff, which I look at, and to me it's like, okay, well, I see the appeal, I understand the appeal, but nothing in there is drawing me. But that is
No.
his world right now, and I'm sure when he's 25, 35, whatever, he's going to look back very, very fondly on those particular games, right? So
He's gonna want to fire up Minecraft and play. Yeah, yeah.
totally.
You're absolutely right. Jesse, very much the same. He'll want to play Minecraft. He will also, though, want to play some like Mario Kart 8, Smash Brothers.
Hmm. Hmm.
But we've got a Switch, so
Hmm.
he
Hmm.
plays the Switch a lot. And I think the last time that I played something that gave me any kind of feeling of like, this is something special, this is something original, and this is a new feeling, this is a new memory that I'm forming, was Breath of the Wild.
Mm.
I don't know if you played it or not, but like Zelda Breath of the Wild, when I played that game, I'm an adult, and this is post having kids and everything like that. And I would say probably the feeling wasn't as strong as some of the feelings that we developed as kids. Reality is so different for kids,
Hmm. Hmm.
and emotions and the attachments that you form with things are so much stronger because they mean so much more to you. You haven't been alive that long,
Of
and they're
course.
hugely impactful to your experience. Whereas now it's like, as an adult, you've got so many responsibilities and so many distractions. You really can only devote so much of yourself to a video game. But I will say that my initial experience playing Breath of the Wild was special enough that I'll probably look back on it fondly, 20 years from now.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I don't think that it'll be anything as powerful as, again, like all of the nostalgic memories that we formed from our childhood.
Well, so here's the thing though, like we tend to forget bad memories
Yes.
and we tend to really remember the good ones, right? So
Self-preservation, basically.
absolutely, that's exactly what it is. And like looking back, so think about playing a game like Ninja Turtles or any of the other very like insanely difficult games. You won't remember the 99 times you died. You're going to remember the feeling of that 100th time that you succeeded
Right,
or whatever. You
right.
know what I mean? And that's, when we deal with nostalgia, that's what we're drawing on, is all the positive memories. And it's like the negative memories, we're maybe cognitively aware that they're there, that they existed, but they don't form part of that nostalgic feeling. So it's a bit of a deceptive thing, and that's why sometimes we do go back to the exact same experience, we recreate it, and it's kind of not that good,
Mhm.
because all of a sudden we're faced with all the things that maybe made it less than good that we've just forgotten about, or they're just not part of our consciousness anymore. So
Right.
it's a fascinating thing. I will say this. There was a period of time in my life where, right around the Dreamcast, Xbox, PS2, GameCube generation, that was the last generation where I was like heavily invested into modern gaming. That was the last Xbox I ever got, the last PlayStation I ever got. I've got nothing newer than that, and I have no interest in it. I have kept up with Nintendo systems, but primarily just for like the Mario Zelda experiences. So for a long time, I was almost exclusively a retro gamer, and then I got a Switch. And the games that appeal to me the most are the ones that are made by indie
Mhm.
studios, the low budget ones where they have to succeed on innovation and gameplay because they just don't have the AAA studio multi-million dollar budget and all that kind of stuff. So that's gaming that appeals to me
Mhm.
now, from a modern sort of perspective. And maybe I think that's something that's never going to change with me, you know
Yeah.
and that's just the way it is. So yeah.
There have been instances where I've picked up a modern game, or I've sat down with somebody playing a modern game and I've thought to myself, wow, games have really come a long way, and there are a lot of
Sure.
mechanics that have been improved, a lot of quality of life features, a lot of, boundaries surpassed in terms of ray tracing and stuff like that. And that to a degree, I'm missing out. There are some things that I'm missing out on when I choose to spend my time revisiting the past,
Mm.
So like I'm a huge hardware nerd, right? I love,
Hmm.
retro
Hmm.
hardware. And I think that part of it is, like I say, this intangible kind of like OCD that I just have a fascination with proprietary hardware. I have a
Hmm.
fascination with, you know, software running on bespoke hardware, and that there are so many limitations involved that the developers had to overcome, and that there are so many little quirks about this hardware that gives it its unique personality, whether it be how it renders 3D or the type of gameplay experiences that you get when you play that system, like the Neo Geo or the PlayStation, or the Saturn. These machines just have a very strong identity, where I feel like that is kind of lost today with modern platforms that are essentially just beefed up PCs, basically, or just like
Yep.
a box with off the shelf components, and every year you get kind of like a iteration, an upgrade based on whatever new processor is out.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
mean, effectively, these old consoles, even like the 3DO, it's just so it's just so locked down and proprietary, and there are creative things that developers were able to do with it, but to a degree, it's just a 3DO game is a 3DO game, love it or hate it,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so I think that part of my fascination comes from that, like I've been wasting a lot of time lately playing Saturn online. It's a very limited experience. You're dialing up another individual, on both sides, and you're playing these Saturn games, via a dial up modem, essentially. But it's great. I mean, it does tap into my nostalgia to a degree. It satisfies my OCD, and it also helps me kind of like, push the console and experience like what this console was capable of,
Totally.
as proprietary as it is, and yeah, I mean, maybe part of that is just being old, is that I've
Oh,
become interested in this kind of stuff. But
it really sounds like you and I are cut from the same cloth, because everything you've just said is exactly how
Yeah.
I love proprietary hardware. I love seeing, what, folks were able to do with it in terms of software. I love quirky, weirdo, obscure add-ons. Like, that all appeals to me.
Right.
So we've talked about two of the three things that you mentioned at the beginning, but we haven't really hit on addiction.
Right.
So
Yeah. Addiction.
I'm really curious, at what point does it switch, do you think, from, a passion or a hobby into more of a compulsion or an addiction? Where's that line?
I think that there's like oftentimes you can experience a strong urge to get or acquire something that if you were able to step outside of yourself for a moment, you would say, I don't actually really need this at all.
Oh, wow.
In
Yep.
fact, I
100%.
need to pay my mortgage. I need to provide for my kids, and there are a lot of other things like that are very sensible things that I could get. Like I could get a new phone, which I kind of need, but darn it, if I spend my money on that, then I can't get this really old
Yep.
complete inbox, and it has to be pristine, mind you,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Genesis or whatever, like you don't need that, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
neither does the person on eBay that's trying to get rid of it, like
100%.
it's just so, but it's that addiction that kind of drives you to acquire these things. And I think sometimes it's real, sometimes the positive association that you have with these things is real enough to justify that acquisition, because again, if you take joy from it, then there's nothing wrong with that,
Mhm.
if it makes you happy. But if you end up getting it and then you immediately feel like this was a wasteful purchase and it's just going to sit on the shelf, you kind of got to take a step back and say, like, have I gone too far?
Yep. Oh, for sure. And I mean, there was a point in my life where I became hyper aware of what collecting for gaming was doing to me. And, like, I think it's more common to hear, like, a wife will say, "Oh, all my husband ever does is sit on the couch and play video games." And that's maybe a bit of a stereotype. I mean, it certainly could go both
Right.
ways, but that, you hear about that. But what I found with myself, there was a time where it wasn't so much the sitting down on the couch and playing the game as it was hunting for a specific game or a specific item,
Yes.
purchasing it, whatever, and then it would come in through the mail or what have
Yes.
you. You open it, you check it to make sure it is as advertised, nothing's wrong with it or broken, and then it hits the shelf.
Because you're exercising your nostalgia. In
Mm,
that moment, you have nostalgia for games being hard fought. Back in the day when you were a kid and you had to wait for a birthday or for Christmas or for
mhm.
some special event, or you had to take out the trash, you had to work hard for the money to acquire a game. And so until you acquired that game, you thought about it nonstop. You would read the magazines. You'd go to the store and maybe you couldn't even afford to buy the magazine, but you keep reading that same magazine, and salivating over this thing that you were going to get. That right there is part of the experience of being a retro gamer. That's what we had to do when we were kids. You didn't have disposable income,
Mm,
and you have so many great memories about that delayed gratification, I
sure. Yep.
guess.
Yep.
You actually have nostalgia for that too. So the acquisition of games nowadays, waiting for it to come after you've ordered it from eBay or whatever, maybe even the indecision of not actually buying it and then finally buying the thing that it was like the perfect thing that satisfies, checks all the boxes for you, and then you're waiting for it to come. But once it comes, you know
Yeah.
you've got it.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah.
you know you already can play it on an EverDrive,
Mhm.
or maybe you've been playing it on an EverDrive. So what, do you open it up and read the manual and kind of scratch that itch?
Yeah.
Again, to a certain extent, it's an escape. To a certain extent, it's like trying to relive the past versus living in the present. And how much time do you spend reliving the past versus
New
creating new
memory. Oh,
memories
for
that
sure.
you'll have?
100%. Yeah.
And when you talk about riding bike and spending time with your son, those are the new memories that you're going to look on fondly.
100%. Um,
Yeah.
I have caught myself even recently when I've either had a bad day or it's just not feeling the best, whatever, kind of reaching to eBay and kind of scrolling through and seeing if I could buy something, not so much because I needed it, maybe not even so much because I wanted it, but I wanted that good feeling from knowing that I've just acquired something else.
retail therapy.
Yeah, and boy, that's and it's not like these things are 50 cents a pop. Like, you've got to drop some money on it. And like, I mean, I'll say this. So this morning I bought a Saturn on eBay. It's going to come in the mail
Because you need more, right?
because I only, because clearly I don't have enough. So, you know, do I need another? I do not need another. I should get rid of half my Saturns and I'd still have more than the
Is
average.
it some rare revision or
It
something?
really isn't. It is a vanilla Sega Saturn, an American Sega Saturn. I mean, the one thing I guess that it has going for it, if you could call it that, is it's a 1997 build, and it is using the very last board revision that was ever used in North America. And yes,
Okay.
okay, arguably I don't have
That's OCD
that
right there.
yet. Yeah, right. So, but is that something that I needed? If I were to, like you had said earlier, if I took a step outside of my body and evaluated the situation, I really don't see that was a healthy purchase. You know what I mean?
And I think that it's easy to I can completely relate. And I often think to myself, "Oh, well, if I change my mind later, I can just sell it, right? Because these things
Mm.
are just ridiculously
Hmm.
going up in price." But of course, they're not always going to be, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the bubble is probably going to pop at some point, right? We have a friend in the community, Sega Steve, and he was at PRGE with us and
Yep.
everything. Dude has
A lot of
a
stuff.
mountain, a sea of Saturns, and I think he just acquired a couple more, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And again, I know that he's just like us, with the OCD and the really, really, niche justifications for things like, oh, well, it's a very specific model number. It's a very specific revision, board revision, right? Got to catch them all, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the funny thing is, Nintendo, they knew that our brains worked like that. And so they capitalized on it, right? And
Totally.
we're going to release 3 different colors of this game and, and you're going to have to catch them all, Um,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
we haven't changed a bit, since we're honestly, we're just animals and our brains work a certain way, right? Dopamine, serotonin, you
Totally.
know, the things that matter though. Okay. So, like, case in point, just the other night, I stayed up late, which I don't normally do because I have to work early and stuff, but I stayed up late on a Wednesday night and I played Shadows of the Tusk with Pat,
Mm.
right?
Hmm. Yeah.
We had like 10 people in the chat, 10 people in the SHIRO Discord chat, and just hanging out with those folks and having fun with folks and everything. Those are new memories that I'm forming, that are really good, positive memories, good experiences. And I know for a fact that, not only was that fun, but I'm going to definitely, look back on that fondly.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, again, we're chasing this high, that we had when we were little kids,
Hmm.
because when you were a kid, you didn't have responsibility and the world seemed like a much safer place. It
Yes.
wasn't actually, the Gulf War
100%.
was going on, the trouble in Afghanistan, presidents getting caught doing stuff they weren't supposed to, you had, I mean, going all the way back in history, there's always been, turmoil. There's always been, stuff swirling around.
Hmm.
But as
Hmm.
a kid, you are just so ambivalent to all of it. Your parents are there to do all the worrying and you're just there to have fun, And so you can enjoy these things like video games so much more
You're right.
because you don't have all of that other stuff weighing down on you and distracting you from just this pure thing, the pure essence of joy that you
Hmm.
get from
Hmm.
a video game.
That's very true.
I think that my dad got into the PlayStation. The PlayStation has a lot of dark and gritty games, It has a lot of games with mature themes. And I think that that kind of helped get my dad back into video games in the mid 90s when he got a PlayStation, because at that point, it would be really hard for him with all of the concerns of an adult, with kids and everything like that, to really get into some kiddie fun game, But being a lover of film and music and art and everything like that, he could really get into and resonate with some of these darker, grittier PlayStation games, that dealt with mature themes and
Hmm. Hmm.
war and death and difficult relationships and stuff like that. So, games did something for him, in that vein. But again, it's just more complicated. I mean, even Shenmue, Shenmue starts with
Yeah,
his
yeah.
father being killed, and the whole thing is about revenge. It was
Those are
pretty
mature themes.
That's a
Yeah,
pretty like
definitely.
heavy topic. I was a teenager when I played. I was about Ryo's age when I played that. So to be honest with you, I have really good memories associated with that game as well. But it's different than the memories I have playing, Sonic the Hedgehog with my sister or brother.
Do you think that when we get to an even older age, so our kids are now grown up, they've moved out, we no longer need to, take care of them nearly to the extent that we do now financially, at that point we're now more stable, we've got more money because we don't have the kids to finance and so on and so forth,
Hmm.
and even maybe to an extent physically we're not quite as capable of doing the same amount of stuff as we perhaps could in the past. At that point, do you think that we will become more involved in gaming? Do you think that that will increase, or do you think it'll sort of be a no different than it is, say, now?
I honestly wonder about that. I
Isn't
wonder
that,
about that so much. I don't know. Like, part of me wonders, like, when I'm 60, will I even care anymore? Will I have
yeah,
exhausted
yeah.
through SHIRO and everything like that, and being a content creator? Will I have exhausted every last ounce of
Mm.
damn that I can give, about this stuff?
Hmm, hmm,
Will my
hmm.
consoles, will the caps all be burnt out to the point where none of them actually work? And then I'm 60 and I have to like, I got to go recap all these consoles to make them work again, right? I don't know. There's so many questions. I think will these things be kind of like baseball cards where the market just nobody cares anymore? These games are worth mountains of gold right now, but I mean, at some point, will there be just pretty much nobody left to really even care? There has to be a demand in order for there to be value in something.
Yep. Yeah.
I don't know. I asked myself all those questions, and of course, I've spent a lot of time kind of recently collecting magazines that
Hmm, hmm.
specifically, like the Sega Saturn magazines and the Next Generation and Edge and stuff like that. And I think that has a lot less to do with nostalgia and more to do with this wanting to kind of round out, I guess, my
Hmm,
experience with
hmm.
video games, and come at it from more of a adult perspective and wanting to know more about the context and everything like that of the time. Because again, when I grew up, I wasn't really focusing on that stuff. Your experience of video games was much more end user, you know, and
Yeah.
if you were reading magazines as a kid, you were probably reading like tips and tricks, or you were reading like,
100%.
Nintendo Power or something like that. And then now I really do get kind of a high from turning a page and seeing, oh my God, here's an article, a really, really early article about a Saturn prototype, like,
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah.
it's fun. It's fun, because it's almost like you can look at that time from another perspective.
Hmm.
But
Oh
yeah, it's
yeah.
it's crazy. Like, I don't have an answer for you, honestly, Peter. But I know one thing: I'm gonna have a lot of great memories of talking with you on Editor's Corner. And hope
Likewise.
I want to get you one of those live modems, one of those little USB modems, so that we can
Hmm.
get you online. Because I know you have a net link. You've got the
Yes.
modem cart, right? And you've got plenty of Saturns. So I just need to get you online so that you and I can have a couple of matches, Canada to US. That would be fun.
That sounds like a really good
It's
time.
on my high priority list. Knight just finished soldering a bunch of them, so I'm
Hmm,
going to make
hmm.
sure you get one of those, and it would be awesome to add you to our Netlink league. But yeah, I don't know. Like I say, all these things are hard to comment on or hard to pin down empirically because they're so intangible, and it kind of varies from person to person.
Yep, absolutely.
Our level of OCD, our level of addiction, or our level of nostalgia. But I think you and I are pretty similar in that sense. We're pretty similar.
Oh, I think so, yes. We may have maybe come at it from different angles, but I think we ended up in very much the same headspace, the same, I mean, gosh, how often is it that we talk about something and, we're talking over each other because we both think the exact same way. So yeah, that's a
Yeah.
phenomenon, that's for sure.
So selling your Nintendo 64 seems like a pretty healthy decision then, and one that you're happy with.
Yeah, so I'll say this. So as I was saying, up until the Dreamcast, GameCube, PS2, and original Xbox generation, I was buying everything, all the consoles. as many games as I could afford, and the amount of money I was blowing on games then was ridiculous, just ridiculous, you know.
Hmm.
Um, but it wasn't ultimately the money that made me turn away from doing that. It was the space. Like
Yes.
this stuff was taking over, and so yes, I still have a lot of physical stuff, but it is, first of all, nowhere near as much as I used to have. It's really reduced. And second of all, I enjoy keeping my gaming collection to one wall in one room of my house.
Right.
That's it.
Hmm.
And I've sort of made up my mind that I will not permit it to go beyond that. So if I really want something and there's no room for it, then something else has to
Something's got to
go,
go.
you
Right.
know? And so, yeah, and so there's been a lot of trimming and whatever. So same with the Nintendo 64 stuff. Like I've recently been wanting to get back into it, but it better be virtual or emulation or an ODE because there is no way, and I'm not even talking financially, but there's no way that I would want to entertain, starting a new collection of physical things that I need to keep. That's just not a thing anymore. So, and I will admit this too, Dave. I've been thinking about this a lot too, and I have decided that the Switch is going to be the last console that I buy.
Mm.
As time goes on, I can continue to, I guess, augment and buy bits and pieces, odds and sods for the consoles or the systems that I own, but I will not buy anything newer or more recent that comes out, no matter what it may be or how good it may be, simply because, there's only so much of life. There's still so much more I want to experience and accomplish and do.
Hmm.
And games have been amazing and will always be a part of me and who I am and all that. But I need to actively limit how much of my life I am, dedicating to that particular hobby. So, and that I am at peace
Yeah, I
with.
agree. I agree with that. And you might end up buying something for Patrick. He might end up
Yes.
asking
Yep.
for it, and so
Yep.
it
Yep.
somehow works its way into your household. I know that that's the case for, my dad,
Mm,
he probably wouldn't have otherwise bought certain things that he did, because the kids begged for it. But no, you know what? You're right. And I think that anybody out there who knowingly suffers from a degree of addiction or OCD would be very well served to do like you did and create a boundary for yourself.
hmm.
Part of being, having OCD is creating arbitrary rules that you have to follow, right? Well, I mean, what better to do than to create a hard limit boundary for yourself where you say, I am not going to do this if it exceeds like this room or this shelf, right? And if you create that healthy boundary for yourself and you stick to it, it's a discipline, it's a self-discipline. It's not always going to be easy, but it is important because this is all great as long as it remains healthy and fun, But when
Yes.
it gets
Yes.
to the point where you are seeking fulfillment in these pointless and trivial, acquisitions, that don't end up, leaving you with any kind of real happiness, that's when you really have to take a step back and say, okay, why am I doing this? Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that folks are going to get more enjoyment out of the experiences that they share with others, versus just these lonely
Totally.
experiences, So it's very important for folks to take a step back and kind of look at their game collection and say, okay, what here is important? What here means something to me? And then what here is just filler, or it's just here
As a consequence of,
as a consequence of bad decisions that I've made, and it's
yeah.
taking up space,
Hmm.
and it's taking up space from other stuff that might make a bigger difference, I highly recommend that folks join a community where they can talk and share and, share these experiences because that again is going to help create a lot of positive memories and a lot of positive experiences and quite possibly help provide support, for,
Yep.
you
You're
know,
right.
a lot of these things, we'll deal with separately, from one another, but when we are able to talk to each other about it, it gives you more perspective and ability to step back and say, okay, I need to reevaluate,
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that's good for everybody.
What a perfect way to cap off this conversation, really, I find. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah, for
it
sure.
sounds like we both have come to a place of relative peace. And that's not to say, like, I mean, you just got this Genesis that, maybe
Hmm.
you didn't need. You know, I just today bought a Saturn that clearly objectively I didn't need. So it's not something that you can just shut the door on and it goes away forever. But,
Well, it takes
you
up
know,
less space, and I'm seriously thinking about getting rid of the Model 1. I'm not sure, like, I don't need multiple Genesis, if that's how you say it. But I mean, definitely I wanted to be able to play Genesis on a real hardware. And I mean, it takes up so much less space. So that's why I went
hmm
with the
hmm
Model 2, despite not having any nostalgia for it, you know?
hmm
But I do think it looks really slick and cute. Like, Sega really knew how to design consoles, didn't
Oh,
they?
absolutely.
Because every single one looks so cool, you know?
Absolutely.
But yeah, I have multiple things that I've stacked up here that need to be listed to eBay, you know?
Mm,
And I know that's going to make me happy and that's going to make Meg happy and it's going to give us a little bit of extra spending change, you know? So,
hmm hmm
but yeah, it's just the matter of doing it, you know, getting it, which, you know, it can be work, you know, listing things on
Oh, for
eBay and
sure.
everything, and then following through with the shipping and everything can be work. But I've got like a pile of stuff that is ready to go up. And so, yeah, purging is a good thing, you know?
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
There was a few years ago, there was I had a need to renovate a part of my basement. I wanted to create another room. You know, it involved having, you know, some guys come in and put up drywall and this and that and electric, whatever. Um, a few weeks prior, there was sort of an impromptu, this was during COVID. So there was an impromptu sort of game sale gathering thing where a bunch of folks in town, we picked a parking lot in a shopping mall. We got permission from the shopping mall, and everybody just pulled up in their cars and sold out of the trunks of their cars, because that way you could do masking and social distancing, and you were outside, you weren't in an enclosed area, blah blah blah.
Mm,
So that I decided, you know what, that I'm gonna see if I can sell off some of my unwanted items to help fund this little renovation that we were working on. And you know, within a couple of hours I sold thousands of dollars worth of stuff, and it funded this renovation project. And you felt so good.
felt so good.
you
Yeah.
had you had less stuff at home, so less stuff that was sort of cluttering and tying you down, and you turned it into something super positive. So yeah, 100%. You know, the ability to evaluate and reduce and purge, and take your time thinking about it, because the last thing you want to do is get rid of something that, within a few weeks you realize, I should have kept that.
Yeah.
So don't put yourself in that spot, but you definitely, definitely there is, I think, a happy balance that you could achieve,
Hmm.
where you have what you want but you don't have too much. You know what I mean?
If you're fortunate enough to be in a position where you don't really need the money per se, and you have excess, you might even consider giving it away to somebody else who
Mm-hmm.
would enjoy it. Because I think that a lot of
Totally.
times just knowing that it's going to somebody who's going to love it and enjoy it, and maybe they didn't have the means of acquiring it, you know, easily. That's great, you know. Like, I've given consoles away too, and I've had folks give me consoles, honestly, or give me
Mm-hmm.
bits and here and there, you know. And again, it was just because they weren't using it and they didn't necessarily need the money or want to sell it, but they were like, hey, you like video games, here, have some of this stuff that, you know, that I had fun with back in the day, you know. So again, you know, that might be something too, is if you know somebody who might enjoy it, just, you know, give it away and see how good that makes you feel. Because oftentimes, you know, that can be a great way to bring joy to somebody else's life too, you know. Anyway,
Yep.
I think this was a great topic. There's probably so much more we could say about it. Again, we were shooting from the hip though, as we do on the editor's corner. We're not really, you know, we don't have a whole lot of notes. It's really more or less just speaking from personal experience. But definitely a lot of the stuff that you said resonates with me, and I totally wholeheartedly agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, likewise, it was a great chat.
But yeah, so this has been Saturn Dave and Peter reminding you that you must play your Sega Saturn. And we hope that you all have a great couple weeks until the next Editor's Corner comes out. And until next time, we'll see you later.
$2.99. See you later, folks.